To answer this question, I'll start with some of the code that I was using in the hint videos. Here's the homework scores class, and so far it's keeping track of a sum and a number of scores. This code returns a sum, but doesn't actually think about excluding the lowest. The way I see this problem, there are two key insights. The first is that to return the total excluding the lowest, we don't necessarily need to permanently remove the low score. If we can find the low score, we can return the total minus the low score, just subtract it off at the last moment. The second insight is that we don't need to save all of the scores to know what the lowest score is. We only need to save the value of the lowest score itself. So instead of a method that finds the lowest score, I'll create an instance variable to track the lowest score so far. I'll define it as private double lowest. I should probably make these private too. Now I'm going to need some special cases in my get total excluding lowest. Because if the number of scores is 0, I want to return 0. But if the number of scores is 1, I want to return that one score, which is currently the sum. And if there are more, then I want to return the sum without the lowest score. To keep track of how many scores there are, I'm using the counting pattern. I start with the number of scores being 0, and when I add a score, I increment the number of scores by 1. Now for this new variable, lowest score, or lowest as I'm calling it, I need to come up with an initial value. Ideally, I would initialize it with the first score, but I don't know what that is yet in the constructor. So I'll initialize it with -1, and promise never to look at it until I've added at least one score. This is a good example of why you want to keep your instance variables private. People using the homework scores class might not realize that lowest isn't always initialized. Only the homework scores class knows about this implementation detail. And when you mark this as private, it shows that the homework scores objects are responsible for interpreting the data inside of the lowest score variable. So outsiders don't need to remember things like, I shouldn't look at the lowest score until I've added scores. So now I've initialized the lowest score, but I need to think about how it's changing. I'll need to make sure that in add score, when there aren't any scores yet, I should initialize lowest to be the given score. Then I need to think about what happens when I add additional scores. The lowest score seen so far can change whenever I add a score. This is a lot like looking for the minimum score in a loop. When I see a new score, if the score is less than the lowest so far, I update the lowest to be score. Now it looks like under both of these conditions, num scores is 0 or the score is less than the lowest, I change the lowest to be the score. So let's make this into one if statement. If num scores is 0 or score is less than lowest, then lowest equals score. And I can get rid of this repetition. And then these two statements happen no matter what. Whenever I see a new score, I count that I've seen another score, and I add the score to the sum. So now if I compile and fix my syntax errors, I can run the homework scores tester, and the homework scores class behaves as it should.